I learned to trust my axe before I trusted my courage. The weight of it in my hand was a solid, simple truth in a world of shifting sands and whispered lies. It did not question orders. It did not feel fear. It only knew the path from my shoulder to a target, and the satisfying thud of steel biting into wood or leather or flesh. Courage was a more fickle thing. It came and went with the rising sun, the beat of the war drums, or the look in a brother's eyes. But the axe was always there. Its haft, worn smooth by my grip, was a constant companion in the pre-dawn chill of our barracks outside Orgrimmar. It was my first salute to the day and my last prayer at night. Our outpost was a splinter of defiance hammered into the red, angry earth of Duroder. The wind was a constant sculptor, shaping the dust into fleeting ghosts that danced between the hide tents and the spiked barricades. It carried the scent of scorpion venom, baked rock, and the distant metallic tang of the forges in the Valley of Strength. Life was a rhythm of drills, patrols, and waiting. We drilled until our muscles burned with a fire that matched the midday sun, our movements becoming a single, brutal ballet of shield and blade. We marched patrols into the canyons where thunder lizards roared their displeasure at our presence, and quillboar watched from thorny burrows with hate-filled eyes. And then we waited. We waited for the supply caravans from the crossroads, we waited for new orders from the Warchiefs command, and we waited for the war that was always just over the horizon. My name is Kurg, son of Grok, of a clan whose name was lost to the fell corruption on a world we no longer called home. My honor was not inherited. It was a structure I had to build myself, stone by painful stone, upon the foundation of my loyalty to the Horde. I was a grunt. The title was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. I was the line. I was the wall of green skin, thick muscle, and tempered steel that stood between the Horde's heart and the fangs of its enemies. My world was defined by the shield on my left arm and the axe in my right. The shield was for my brothers and sisters. The axe was for everything else. The mornings were the quietest time. Before the sun had breached the mesas to the east, I would sit outside my tent, running a whetstone along the edge of my axe. The rhythmic shing 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 was a mantra, a way to focus my mind. It was a ritual taught to me by Grolnok, an old veteran whose face was a roadmap of forgotten campaigns. His left tusk was sheared in half, and a milky film covered one eye, but he saw more than most of the younger warriors with two good ones. He would often sit with me, not speaking, just cleaning the leather straps of his own armor, the silence a shared language of understanding. We were both cogs in the great machine of the Horde, and we found comfort in our shared purpose. In those quiet moments, I thought of my oath, sworn in the shadow of the Warchiefs' hold. Luktar Ugar, victory or death. It was a simple promise, but its weight was immense. It meant that every sunrise was a gift, and every sunset was a potential farewell. It meant that fear was a luxury we could not afford. We could feel it, yes, the cold knot in the gut when a night elf arrow hissed past your ear, or the primal terror when a charging Kodo shook the very ground beneath your feet, but we could not let it rule us. We had to swallow it, digest it, and turn it into fuel for our rage. The day's routines were harsh, but necessary. We practiced shield wall formations under the blistering sun until sweat soaked our leather harnesses and turned the dust on our skin to mud. The drill sergeant, a massive orc named Karg Skullsplitter, would stalk the lines, his voice a gravelly roar. Tighter. A quillboar could crawl through that gap. You want a spear in your guts because the orc next to you is lazy? Tighter. He would slam the flat of his enormous blade against a shield, the clang echoing across the training grounds. A shield that buckled, an orc that stumbled, earned a torrent of abuse. It was brutal, but it forged us into a unit. We learned to lean on one another, to trust the orc on our left, and protect the one on our right. We became a single entity, a bristling shell of wood and steel. After the drills came the spars. This was where individual skill was honed. I often paired with Zorka, a young female orc whose fire burned brighter than anyone I knew. She was smaller than most of us, but faster, her twin axes a blur of motion. She fought with a reckless abandon that was both her greatest strength and her most dangerous flaw. She sought her first real taste of battle, her first true kill mark to paint on her armor. I fought with a more measured style, letting my shield absorb the fury of her attacks, waiting for the opening. Our spars were a clash of philosophies, her relentless offense against my patient defense. More often than not, they ended in a draw, with both of us breathing heavily, leaning on our weapons, a shared respect in our eyes. Our unit was a microcosm of the Horde itself. Besides Grolnak, Zorka, and myself, there was Mako, a Tauren shaman. He was a mountain of calm in our sea of controlled aggression. While we sharpened steel, he would sit cross-legged, his eyes closed, communing with the spirits of the harsh land. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. He spoke of the balance of things, of the earth that provided for us and the elements that tested us. Some of the younger orcs found him strange, but Grolnak taught us to respect him. The spirits of this world are not our enemies, he had grunted one evening. And Mako speaks their tongue. A wise warrior listens to all the voices on the wind, not just the ones that shout for blood. Mako was our anchor, the one who could mend our wounds with a gentle green light and soothe the angry earth after our battles had scarred it. Evenings were for sustenance and stories. We would gather around the communal fire pit, the flames casting dancing shadows on our faces. The food was simple, tough, stringy kodo meat roasted on skewers, hard biscuits that threatened to crack a tusk, and water from the skins that always tasted faintly of leather and dust. But it was hot, and it filled our bellies. It was enough. Here, Grolnak would tell his tales. He spoke of the First and Second Wars on a world we could barely imagine, of battles against the blue and gold soldiers of Stormwind in forests of impossible green. He spoke of the dark times, of the demonic curse that had enslaved our people, a shadow that still lingered in the hearts of the older generation. He never glorified the bloodshed. He spoke of it as a grim necessity, a job that had to be done. His stories were lessons disguised as history. They taught us caution, they taught us tactics, and most importantly, they taught us what we were fighting for, a future free from the chains of the past, a home of our own. One evening, Zorka, impatient as ever, had interrupted him. Enough of the past, old one. Tell us of the future. Tell us of the glory we will win. When do we march on the humans? When do we crush the elves who trespass in our lands? Grolnak had looked at her with his one good eye, the firelight glinting off his broken tusk. He took a slow chew of his meat before he answered, his voice low. Glory is a story told by the survivors. The dead have no use for it. You seek battle, little spark. Good. The Horde needs that fire. But remember, the goal of a warrior is not to die for the Horde. It is to make the other fool die for his. He then fell silent, and the weight of his words settled over us all. Life in the outpost was a whetstone, grinding away our softness, our individuality, until all that remained was the hard, sharp edge of a soldier. We were being prepared. Every drill, every patrol, every story was a part of that preparation. We did not know when the call would come, or from where. It could be the quill boar to the south, the centaur of the barrens, or the ever-present thread of the alliance across the sea. It did not matter. We were the axe of a horde, and we were being sharpened. My courage was still a flighty thing, but my trust in my axe, in my shield, and in the orcs beside me was absolute. That, I was learning, was more than enough. The red dust of Duroder had seeped into my skin, into my very soul. I was a part of this land, a protector of its harsh beauty, and I was ready. The call came not with the grand blast of a horn or the dramatic arrival of a wolf rider bearing the Warchiefs standard. It came with the hurried, dust-caked appearance of a runner from the northern barrens, his chest heaving and a panicked look in his eyes. He stumbled into our command tent, gasping out a report to Karg Skullsplitter. Words drifted out to us on the hot wind. Sentinel's lumber camp, overrun, Warsong Gulch. The casual rhythm of the outpost shattered in an instant. The lazy conversations ceased. The clang of the practice yard fell silent. A new sound took its place. The sharp, urgent rasp of steel being drawn from sheaths, the clatter of armor being buckled into place. Karg emerged from the tent, his face a grim mask of fury. His voice, which we thought could not get any louder, boomed across the compound, shaking the very air. Warriors of the Horde, the pointy-eared tree-dwellers have forgotten their place. They have spilled Orcish blood on lands that are ours by right of conquest. They have attacked our lumber operations in Ashenvale. The Warchief calls. The Horde calls. He raised his massive axe, its blade catching the harsh sunlight. We march north. We will answer this insult with steel and with fire. Sharpen your blades. Gather your gear. We march in 1 hour. A roar went up from the assembled grunts, a deep, guttural sound that was part fury, part bloodlust, and part relief. The waiting was over. Zorka let out a sharp cry of exhilaration, her eyes blazing. Grolnok simply spat on the ground and began methodically checking the straps on his shield, his movements economical and practiced. Mako stood and raised his head, sniffing the air as if he could already smell the distant forests of Ashenvale. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold fire that banished all other thoughts. This was it. This was the moment we had trained for. I returned to my tent, my movements swift and purposeful. There was no time for reflection, only for action. I strapped on my greaves, my gauntlets, my heavy shoulder guards emblazoned with the Horde symbol. Each piece of armor was a familiar weight, a second skin of hardened leather and iron. I checked my axe one last time, its edge keen enough to shave the bristles from a boar. I secured my shield to my arm, feeling its solid, reassuring presence. I filled my water skin and stuffed a few strips of dried meat into a pouch. It was a sparse kit, designed for mobility and endurance. We were not marching to a parade. We were marching to war. Before we formed up, Grolnok clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. His one good eye bored into mine. Keep your head down and your shield up, Kurg. Don't be a hero. Heroes end up with their names carved on a rock. Survivors get to drink grog. It was the closest he ever came to showing concern. I nodded, my throat too dry for words. He gave my shoulder a rough squeeze and then moved off to join the forming ranks. Zorka was practically vibrating with excitement, her twin axes already in her hands. She gave me a wide, feral grin. At last, a proper fight. Their precious trees will be watered with elven blood. Mako approached me last, his presence a pool of calm in the rising tide of war fever. He placed a hand, large as a dinner plate, on my chest. His deep voice rumbled. The spirits of the forest are ancient and proud, Kurg. We go to a land that does not know us. Tread with purpose, but with respect. There is more at work in old woods than just the quarrels of orcs and elves. His words were cryptic, but I felt their weight. He then gave me a slow nod and moved to take his place in the formation, his large totem swaying gently on his back. We stood in ranks in the central compound, a legion of green and brown under the red sun. Karg Skullsplitter stood before us, flanked by the outpost standard-bearers. The banner of the Horde, red and black, snapped in the wind. He did not give a long speech. He did not need to. He simply raised his axe again and bellowed a single phrase, the ancient war cry of our people. Luptarugar. We roared it back as one, our voices a single, thunderous wave of sound that rolled across the scorched plains of Duroder. Elukotarugar. Victory or death. The oath was reaffirmed. The choice was made. With a final, ground-shaking stomp of his boot, Karg turned and began the march north. And we, his weapon, followed him into the dust and the uncertainty, our hearts pounding to the rhythm of the drums of war. The march from Duroder to the northern barrens was a trial by fire, a deliberate culling of the weak. The land itself was an enemy. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down from a sky the color of bleached bone. The air was thick with dust that coated our tongues, clogged our nostrils, and turned our sweat into a gritty paste. We marched in a long, snaking column, the heavy tread of our boots kicking up a red cloud that marked our passage for miles. The silence was punctuated only by the rhythmic tramp of feet, the creak of leather, and the occasional guttural command from Karg. We moved at a relentless pace, stopping only for brief rests when the sun was at its most punishing. During these pauses, we would huddle in the shade of the rare, thorny acacia trees or the looming mesas that dotted the landscape. Water was rationed strictly. We each took small sips from our skins, the lukewarm liquid doing little to quench the fire in our throats. The dried meat was tough and salty, but it provided the strength to keep moving. It was during these brief respites that the bonds of our unit truly began to form. We were no longer just orcs training together. We were a family forged in hardship. Grolnok, with his endless well of experience, taught us how to read the land. He showed us how to spot the shimmering air that betrayed a hidden pocket of angry silithid, and how to find a meager shade on the lee side of a rock outcropping. He shared his water with Zorka when she, in her youthful impatience, had drunk hers too quickly. He did it without a word, simply nudging his water skin into her hand with a grunt. It was a lesson in conservation and comradeship she would not forget. Zorka's initial fiery enthusiasm was tempered by the grueling reality of the march. The Barons did not care for glory or bloodlust. It cared only for survival. She learned to pace herself, to match the steady, ground-eating stride of the veterans. Her boisterous energy was channeled into a focused determination. She started watching Grolnok, mimicking his movements, his efficiency. She learned that a true warrior's strength was not just in the fury of the charge, but in the endurance to reach the battle in the first place. Mako seemed almost at home in the harsh landscape. He walked with a steady, unhurried gait that somehow kept pace with the rest of us. He often paused to place a hand on the baked earth or run his fingers over a sun-scorched rock, his eyes closed in concentration. He once stopped the entire column by holding up a hand. Karg, annoyed, stomped back to him. "What is it, Tauren? We are not on a nature walk." Mako simply pointed to a narrow pass ahead. "The earth moans," he rumbled. "It is hungry." Grolnok squinted, his good eye scanning the pass. He grunted in agreement. "He's right. Centaur ambush. See the dust signs on the ridge? They're waiting for us to enter the kill zone." Karg's eyes narrowed. He gave Mako a look of grudging respect and then bellowed for the scouts to find another way around. Mako had saved us from walking into a trap, not with keen eyes, but with a wisdom that ran deeper than sight. Our journey was not without its clashes. The Barons were aptly named, but they were not empty. We fought our way through packs of slavering hyenas that were bold enough to stalk our column. We cleared a path through a territory of quillboar, their thorny nests bristling from the hillsides. These were not battles. They were brutal, messy skirmishes. The first time our shield wall was tested was against a charge of angry centaur who had strayed from their main tribes. The command came as a roar from Karg. "Line! Hold the line!" We slammed our shields together, the heavy wood and iron forming an unbroken barrier. The ground shook as they charged, their hooves tearing up the dry earth. I planted my feet, leaned into my shield, and braced for impact. The crash was deafening. A centaur smashed in my shield, the force of it jarring my entire body, driving me back a step. The air was filled with the splintering of wood, the shriek of horses, and the guttural war cries of my kin. I held my ground, my muscles screaming in protest. To my right, Grolnok grunted as a spear glanced off his shield. To my left, Zorka let out a furious roar and drove her axe into the leg of a centaur that tried to flank our line. This was not the clean, practiced combat of a training yard. It was a chaotic storm of steel, sweat, and blood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the thunder of the fight. Fear was a cold serpent coiling in my belly. But I looked to my left and saw Zorka, her face a mask of primal fury. I looked to my right and saw Grolnok, his one good eye narrowed in grim concentration. I was not alone. I was part of the wall. My fear was my own, but my strength belonged to the line. I let out a roar that tore from my throat, a sound of defiance against the chaos. I found my courage not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of my brothers and sisters. I thrust my axe over the top of my shield, feeling the satisfying crunch as it bit into the shoulder of the centaur pressing against me. It shrieked and reared back, giving me a precious second of breathing room. The battle was a whirlwind of desperate moments, a shield brother falling, only to be dragged back and replaced by another. Mako's low chants weaving through the din of battle, a pulse of green energy washing over the line, mending a gash on my arm I hadn't even realized I'd received. Card's voice, a constant, roaring beacon, directing our fury. The centaur broke. Their charge had shattered against our wall, and their courage failed them. They turned and fled, leaving a half-dozen of their dead on the blood-soaked ground. We did not cheer. We stood, breathing heavily, our bodies aching, our shields scarred. We had held. We had survived our first real test. We took what supplies we could from the fallen, tended to our wounded, and reformed the column. The march continued. We were bloodied, we were tired, but we were stronger. We had bled together, and that was a bond thicker than any oath. The red dust of the barrens now mingled with the red of our first spilled blood, and the green forest of Ashenvale felt a little closer. We left the scorched plains of the barrens behind, crossing the sluggish waters of the South Fury River into the contested lands of Ashenvale. The change was immediate and jarring. The oppressive heat gave way to a cool, damp air that clung to our skin. The sky, once a vast, empty canvas, was now obscured by the dense canopy of a forest older than any Orcish memory. Towering trees, their trunks as wide as our war machines, formed a cathedral of shadow. The light that filtered through the leaves was a hazy, purple twilight, even at midday. The ground, once hard-packed earth and rock, was now a soft carpet of moss and fallen leaves that muffled the sound of our march. The silence was unnerving. In Duroder and the Barrens, the world was loud, filled with the roars of beasts and the howl of the wind. Here, the silence was a living thing, broken only by the drip of water from a leaf, the call of an unseen bird, or the snap of a twig under a careless boot. It was a watchful silence, and we felt the weight of countless unseen eyes upon us. This was the home of the Caldorii, the night elves, and we were intruders. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden archer, every thicket a prowling sentinel. Card Skullsplitter seemed to feel it too. He slowed our pace, sending out scouts in pairs to probe the woods ahead. The main column moved with a new caution, shields held ready, eyes scanning the canopy. The tension was a palpable thing, a knot in the air that we all felt. Zorka's fiery impatience was replaced by a coiled, predatory focus. Grolnok's cynicism deepened. "I hate forests," he grumbled, his one good eye constantly scanning the high branches. "There's nowhere to see the enemy coming from. They just appear, like angry, purple ghosts." Mako, however, seemed troubled by something more than just the threat of elven arrows. He walked with his head tilted, as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. He would frequently stop and press his palm against the trunk of a great tree, his brow furrowed. "The land is sick," he rumbled one evening as we made a cold camp, foregoing a fire that would give away our position. "There is a discord in the song of the woods, a sour note that grates against the spirit." I asked him what he meant. "The elves mourn their trees," he explained, his deep voice barely a whisper. "Their sorrow is a weight upon the soil. I have felt that before. This is different. This is a pain, a corruption. Something vile has its claws in the heart of this forest." His words were unsettling. We were here to fight elves, a straightforward enemy, we understood. The thought of something else lurking in the shadows, something unnatural, was a cold stone in the pit of my stomach. Grolnok, overhearing us, just grunted. "There's always something else. Never a clean fight. Just remember, Kurg, whatever it is, it bleeds." Our first true clash with the Night Elves was as Grolnok had predicted, sudden, silent, and deadly. We were moving through a narrow ravine when a volley of arrows hissed out of the gloom. There was no war cry, no warning, just the whisper of fletching on the air and the sickening thud of arrows finding their mark. An orc in the rank ahead of me grunted and fell, a long, dark-feathered shaft protruding from his throat. Shields! Karg roared, his voice echoing off the ravine walls. We formed a wall instantly, the muscle memory from our drills taking over. Arrows rained down on us, thudding into the wood and iron of our shields, a deadly percussion against the panicked beating of my heart. We were trapped, a perfect target in the narrow confines of the ravine. We couldn't see them. They were ghosts in the trees above, flitting from branch to branch. We were blind, helpless. Rage began to build in me, a hot tide rising against the cold fear. It was the rage of a cornered animal. We were warriors, meant to charge, to fight face to face, not to be pincushions in a shadowy glade. Zorka was snarling with frustration, hacking at the air with her axes. It was Mako who saved us. While we huddled behind our shields, he stepped out from the line, his totem held high. He began to chant, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to make the very rocks vibrate. The air around him shimmered. He slammed the base of his totem onto the ground, and a wave of force erupted outwards. It wasn't a destructive blast, but a pulse of pure, primal energy. The earth shook, and from the ground around our formation, thick, grasping roots, glowing with a faint green light, tore free from the soil. They writhed like serpents, forming a temporary, living canopy over our heads. The next volley of arrows clattered harmlessly against our new, earthen roof. Karg seized the opportunity. Forward! Charge! Get out of the ravine, he bellowed. We broke formation and ran, hunched low, our shields still held high. We scrambled up the far side of the ravine, slipping on the damp moss and loose stones. As we reached the top, we finally saw them. A handful of night elf sentinels, their silver armor almost invisible against the twilight of the forest, were retreating back into the trees, their bows still in hand. Zorka let out a roar of fury and charged after them, but Grolnok grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. No, you'll run into another trap. We stick together. She struggled for a moment, then subsided, her chest heaving. We had lost 3 orcs in that ambush. We gathered their bodies, our faces grim. There was no time for a proper funeral pyre. We buried them there under the eaves of the forest that had killed them, marking the spot with a simple pile of stones. Mako said a quiet blessing, asking the spirits of the earth to accept our fallen brothers. As we stood over the fresh graves, a scout returned from the direction of the lumber camp. His report was grim. The camp wasn't just overrun, it was annihilated. But he had found something strange. It wasn't just the work of elves. The bodies of our Orcish loggers were twisted, their limbs broken at unnatural angles. And there were other tracks, not elven, not Orcish. Cloven hooves. Mako's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. Satyr, he breathed, the word of venomous hiss. Grolnok spat on the ground, his face dark. Worse than ghosts. Demons, the pieces began to click into place. The unnatural sickness Mako had felled in the land. The strange ferocity of the attack. We were not just fighting night, elves defending their home. We had stumbled into something far older and far more sinister. The night elves were not our only enemy here. They might not even be our primary one. This land was not just sick, it was poisoned. And we had just marched right into the heart of the infection. The revelation that satyrs were involved changed the texture of our mission. The straightforward, honorable clash of Horde against Alliance was now tainted by the foul presence of the Legion's remnants. Satyrs were creatures of pure malice, born from the corruption of night elves ages ago. They delighted in pain, in defilement, and in spreading their fell-tinged poison wherever they roamed. This was no longer a simple territorial dispute. It was an extermination. The night elves were still our enemies, but this new threat was an enemy to all living things. Kar Skullsplitter assembled the unit leaders, Grolnok, Mako, Zorka, and myself, representing our small squad. We gathered in a tight circle, our voices low. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Karg's face was set like granite. The mission has changed, he grunted, his voice a low growl. The Warchiefs sent us to secure the lumber operation and push back the elves. But a demonic infestation, takes precedence. We cannot allow this corruption to spread. It could poison the whole of a Shinvale and spill into the Barrens. Zorka, ever the warrior, slammed a fist into her palm. Good. More skulls for the Horde. Elf, Satyr, it makes no difference to my axes. Grolnak shot her a weary look. Don't be a fool, girl. An elf will put an arrow in you to protect her home. A satyr will put a curse in you to watch you die slowly for its own amusement. They are not the same. Mako nodded in grave agreement. He speaks the truth. The sentinels fight with the spirit of the forest. The satyrs fight with the spirit of the twisting nether. Their poison seeps into the wood, the water, the very soul of the land. If we do not cleanse this place, the forest itself will turn into a weapon against us. A hard choice lay before us. Our orders were to engage the Night Elves, but the greater threat was the satyr corruption. Did we press our attack against the sentinels, who were likely fighting the satyrs as well? Or did we focus on the demonic taint? Karg made the decision with the brutal pragmatism of a seasoned commander. The satyrs are the root of the rot. We cut out the root. We find their lair, and we burn it to the ground. If elves get in our way, we go through them. If they're fighting the demons, we let them waste their arrows. Then we finish what's left. It was a cold calculus of war, but it was sound. Our new objective was a place the scout had identified, an ancient elven ruin deeper in the forest, known as the Shrine of the Moon Serpent. It was from this direction that the satyr tracks had originated. It was likely their base of operations, a place where they were twisting the forest's natural energies to their own vile ends. The plan was simple and direct. We would march on the shrine, breach its defenses, and kill everything inside that was not Horde. As we prepared for the final push, the weight of our purpose settled upon us. This was no longer about resources or territory. It was about survival. It was about preventing a demonic cancer from metastasizing. We reaffirmed our vows to one another, not with loud oaths, but with quiet nods and shared glances. We were a small force, deep in hostile territory, facing two enemies. Our chances were not good, but we were the Horde. We did not fight because the odds were in our favor. We fought because we had to. Mako gathered us, me, Grolnak, and Zorka, for a small ritual. He drew a circle on the ground with a handful of ash and placed a small, smooth stone in the center. The earth here is in pain, he said softly, but it is not yet dead. Its spirit can still lend us strength. Place your hands upon the stone. Feel its resilience. Let it remind you of your own. We did as he asked. I placed my hand on the stone, feeling the cool, solid reality of it. I focused on the feeling, letting it ground me, pushing away the tendrils of fear and doubt. I felt a faint warmth spread from the stone into my hand, a sense of ancient, unyielding strength. It was the strength of mountains, of bedrock, of things that endure. Grolnak grunted, a rare flicker of something other than cynicism in his eye. Zorka's usual manic energy was replaced by a quiet, dangerous intensity. She looked at me, a silent promise passing between us. We would stand together. We would not falter. Whatever horrors awaited us in that shrine, we would face them as one. We broke the circle, our resolve hardened. The fear had not vanished, but it had been forged into something else, a cold, sharp-edged determination. We were a weapon, honed by the march, tempered by our first taste of battle, and now aimed at the heart of the corruption. As we rejoined the main force, the sounds of armor being checked and axes being given a final sharpening filled the air. The fire of battle was in our blood, and we were ready to burn away the sickness that had taken root in this ancient forest. The approach to the Shrine of the Moon Serpent was a descent into a nightmare. The forest grew darker, the trees more gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. A sickly, purple mist clung to the ground, coiling around our boots and muffling all sound. The air grew heavy, thick with the cloying sweet smell of decay and something else, something metallic and foul that reminded me of the warlock's magic back in Orgrimmar. It was the stench of fellfire. Mako's breathing became labored, and he walked with a hand pressed to his chest, as if the very air was a physical weight upon him. "The corruption is strong here," he rasped. "The land weeps." The ruins emerged from the mist like a rotten tooth jutting from the forest floor. The architecture was clearly elven, once graceful and elegant, but now it was defiled. Vile, glowing green runes were scrawled over the ancient white stones. Thorny, unnatural vines choked the pillars, and the serene, reflecting pools were now stagnant pits of bubbling black ooze. The silence here was different. It was not empty, but full of a malevolent watchfulness. We could feel the presence of the satyrs long before we saw them. Karg gave a signal, a low grunt, and a hand gesture. The assault began. There was no subtlety, no stealth. We were a hammer, and this was a door to be broken down. With a unified roar of "For the Horde," we charged from the treeline, a wave of green muscle and black iron crashing against the defiled shrine. The satyrs were waiting. They poured out from the shadowed archways, their forms a grotesque mockery of the elven grace they once possessed. They were wiry and goat-legged, with cruel, intelligent eyes that burned with green fire. They shrieked in a language that was all sharp edges and vile curses, and met our charge with a flurry of wickedly curved blades and bolts of shadow magic. The battle was immediate and brutal. I smashed my shield into the face of the first satyr to reach me, the impact cracking bone. I followed through with my axe, cleaving its skull before it could even fall. The press of bodies was immense. It was a chaotic melee, a maelstrom of steel and spell. I lost sight of my comrades, my world shrinking to the few feet of mud and blood in front of me. I became a machine of block and strike. Shield up, absorb the blow of a jagged scimitar. Axe out, bury it in a scrawny chest. Step forward, repeat. The air was thick with the screams of the dying, both orc and satyr, and the sizzle of fell magic. A bolt of sickly green energy struck my shield, and the wood groaned, scorching under the unholy fire. The force of it threw me back a step. I saw the caster, a satyr with long, cruel horns, its hands wreathed in green flame, preparing another spell. Before I could charge it, a whirlwind of steel erupted beside me. It was Zorka, her twin axes a blur, her face a mask of ecstatic fury. She carved a path through two lesser satyrs and buried both her axes in the warlock's chest. It shrieked a sound of surprise and agony, and collapsed in a heap of smoldering robes. Zorka wrenched her axes free, her body spattered with green-black blood, and gave me a wild, triumphant grin before plunging back into the fray. I pushed forward, rejoining the main line, which was slowly, bloodily, forcing its way into the central courtyard of the shrine. Karg was at the forefront, his massive axe a blur of destruction, his roars of command cutting through the din. We were taking losses. I saw orcs fall, clutching at wounds that smoked with fell energy. But for every orc that fell, we took down 3 of the goatmen. We were fueled by a righteous fury, a deep, primal hatred for these abominations. It was in the courtyard that we faced their leader. It was a hulking brute of a satyr, larger than the others, with massive, bat-like wings and a crown of jagged horns. It wielded a great sword that pulsed with a malevolent purple light. It stood beside what must have been the source of the corruption, a captured night elf sentinel, bound to a desecrated altar. Green tendrils of energy were being drawn from her, feeding a pulsating crystal that hovered above the altar, poisoning the entire area. The sentinel was still conscious, her eyes wide with terror and agony. The satyr lord let out a bellowing laugh that echoed off the ruined stones. "Fools, you come only to die and feed our power. This forest, this world, will belong to the Legion once more." Karg did not waste time with words. He charged the creature, his axe held high. "For the Horde," he roared. The 2 titans clashed, their weapons meeting with a sound like a thunderclap. The force of the blow sent shockwaves through the courtyard. While Karg occupied the leader, the rest of us fought to secure the courtyard and reach the altar. Grolnak, Mako, and I found ourselves fighting back-to-back against a seemingly endless tide of satyrs. "We have to get to that crystal," Mako yelled over the chaos. It is the heart of the poison. Destroy it, and their power will break. It was a desperate plan. The altar was surrounded by the Satyr Lord's elite guard. I'll make an opening. Grolnok grunted. His face was a grim mask of determination. Before I could stop him, he lowered his head and charged, not at a satyr, but at a crumbling stone pillar near the altar. He slammed into it with the full force of his body, a living battering ram. The ancient stone groaned, cracked, and then toppled over with a deafening crash, right into the midst of the elite guard. It crushed several of them instantly and threw the rest into confusion. It was an act of insane, selfless bravery, but left him exposed. As he struggled to rise from the rubble, a half-dozen satyr blades plunged into his back and sides. He looked over at me, his one good eye finding mine through the chaos. A bloody grin split his face. Survivors, drink grog. He coughed and then collapsed. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over me, drowning out all fear, all pain. Grolnok, the cynical, scarred survivor, had sacrificed himself for a chance. I would not let it be in vain. Zorka, Mako, with me, I roared, my voice raw with grief and fury. We charged into the opening Grolnok had created. Zorka was a storm of vengeance, her axes reaping a terrible toll on the disorganized guards. Mako followed behind us, his hands glowing, slamming waves of concussive force into our enemies, buying us precious seconds. I reached the altar. The bound knight elf looked at me, her luminous eyes filled with a surprising emotion. Not just fear, but a plea for release. I raised my axe. The crystal pulsed violently, a vortex of fell energy. I ignored it. I swung my axe not at the crystal, but at the chains holding the elf. The iron link shattered. With my other hand, I shoved her off the altar away from the corrupting nexus. She stumbled, falling to the ground free. Then, I turned my full attention to the crystal. It hummed with power, the air around it vibrating. I raised my axe high, pouring all my rage, all my grief for Grolnok into a single final blow. I brought it down with a roar that tore from the depths of my soul. The axe struck the crystal. For a moment there was silence. Then, with a sound like shattering glass and a dying scream, the crystal exploded in a blinding flash of green and black light. A shock wave of energy erupted outwards, throwing me from my feet. The wave washed over the courtyard, and every satyr shrieked as their borrowed power was ripped away from them. They staggered, weakened, their fell fire sputtering out. It was the turning point. The Horde roared in triumph and fell upon the faltering demons with renewed savagery. The battle had become a slaughter. The aftermath of the crystal's destruction was a deafening silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the dying. The oppressive, sickly green mist that had choked the shrine began to dissipate, replaced by the clean, cool air of the forest. The sun, for the first time since we had entered this cursed place, broke through the canopy, its rays lancing down into the courtyard like golden spears, illuminating a scene of absolute carnage. The ground was littered with the bodies of orcs and the black-blooded corpses of satyrs. The battle was over, but the cost had been staggering. My ears were ringing from the explosion. I pushed myself to my feet, my body a constellation of aches and pains. My first thought was of Grolnok. I stumbled over to the fallen pillar where I had last seen him. He lay in a heap, his armor riddled with black gashes. I knelt beside him, gently turning him over. The life was gone from his eye. His face, even in death, was set in a stubborn, defiant grimace. I closed his eye with my thumb, a lump forming in my throat. He had taught me how to survive, and, in the end, he had shown me how to die for a purpose. I took the half-tusk he wore on a leather cord around his neck, a memento from some long-forgotten beast, and tucked it into my pouch. I would carry his memory. Zorka found me there. The fire in her eyes was banked, replaced by a sober, weary sadness. Her armor was dented and stained, and a deep cut ran along her arm, but she seemed not to notice. She looked down at Grolnok's body and simply said, "He died well. There was no higher praise an orc could give. We stood in silence for a moment, a shared, unspoken eulogy for the old warrior. Mako was already moving among our wounded, his hands glowing with gentle, restorative light. His face was etched with exhaustion, but he worked tirelessly, mending flesh and bone, murmuring soft chants to soothe the spirits of the injured. He had taken a nasty gash to his leg, but he ignored his own wound to tend to others. His quiet strength was the anchor that kept us from falling into despair. I saw Karg's skull splitter standing over the body of the Satterlord. Our commander had won his duel, but not without cost. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, clearly broken, and blood flowed freely from a dozen smaller wounds. Yet he stood tall, the personification of Orcish endurance. He looked out over the courtyard, at the living and the dead, his expression unreadable. He had led us to victory, but his eyes held the heavy knowledge of its price. My attention was drawn to a movement near the desecrated altar. It was the night elf sentinel I had freed. She was on her feet, leaning against a pillar for support. Her silver armor was tarnished and her face was pale, but her eyes, when they met mine, were clear. She held a long, curved blade in her hand, but she made no move to attack. There was a silent understanding that passed between us. We were enemies by birth, by faction, by history. But in this place, we had faced a common foe, a corruption that threatened to devour us both. She gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of respect, of gratitude, and then melted back into the shadows of the forest, disappearing as silently as she had appeared. I did not know if we would meet again on a battlefield, on opposite sides of a shield wall. But for that one moment, we were not Alliance and Horde. We were just two survivors. We spent the next several hours consolidating our position. We secured the perimeter of the shrine, making sure no satyrs had escaped to fester elsewhere in the woods. We gathered our fallen, laying them side by side in the now sunlit courtyard. We counted our losses. Nearly a third of our force had been wiped out. Every single one of us was wounded in some way. The victory felt hollow, bought with too much blood. Carr called me over. His voice was rough with fatigue. Report, Grunt. I stood at attention, my grief for Grolnok locked away behind a wall of military discipline. The Satyr forces are eliminated, Commander. The corrupting crystal has been destroyed. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. In Grolnok? He asked, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. He felt creating the breach at the altar. His sacrifice allowed us to reach the objective. Karg looked towards the line of our dead, and I saw a flicker of genuine pain in his eyes. He was a good soldier, a true son of the Horde. He then looked back at me, his commander's mask back in place. We hold this position until the wounded are stable. Then we burn our dead and march back to the Barrens. Ashenvale is lost to us for now. We have paid too high a price for this piece of dirt. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, we built the funeral pyres. We wrapped our fallen brothers and sisters in their cloaks and laid their weapons upon their chests. It was a solemn, quiet task. There were no tears. Orcs do not mourn with water, but with memory and honor. When the pyres were built, Mako stepped forward. He began a low, mournful chant, a traditional Tauran farewell, asking the Earth Mother to welcome the spirits of the fallen and grant them peace. Then, Karg lit the first pyre with a torch. As the flames took hold, rising to consume our comrades, he raised his good arm and let out a single, heart-wrenching roar. It was not a cry of victory or rage, but a profound loss. We all joined him, our voices rising as one, a final, raw salute to the warriors who would not be making the march home. We had won the battle, but as I watched the smoke carry the ashes of my friends into the twilight sky, all I could feel was the crushing weight of what we had lost. The march back was a grim, quiet affair, a stark contrast to our journey north. We were a wounded column, limping away from a victory that felt more like a defeat. We left the Shrine of the Moon, serpent-cleansed but haunted, a silent monument to the blood we had spilled there. The forest itself seemed to breathe easier, the air cleaner, the shadows less menacing. Mako confirmed it. "The land begins to heal," he had said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "But the scar will remain for a long time, as will ours." We moved with a grim efficiency, our ranks thinner, our steps heavier. The boisterous energy was gone, replaced by a stoic silence. Even Zorka was subdued. The thrill of battle had been scoured from her by the bitter reality of its cost. She walked with her shoulders slumped, her axes hanging limp at her sides. She had seen war, true war, and it had marked her. It had marked us all. I saw her looking at the empty space in the line where Grolnak used to walk, and I knew she was learning the same hard lesson I was. The empty spaces are the true price of glory. I had Grolnak's tusk necklace tucked safely in my pouch. In the evenings, when we made camp, I would take it out and run my thumb over its smooth, worn surface. It was a tangible piece of him, a reminder of his cynicism, his wisdom, and his ultimate sacrifice. He had told me not to be a hero, but in the end, his actions had been nothing short of heroic. He had died not for glory, but for us, for the line. He had bought us our chance to survive. That was a lesson that would stay with me forever. We learned much in that dark forest. We learned that the world was more complicated than just Horde versus Alliance. There were older, darker things stirring in the shadows, ancient evils that cared nothing for our factions or our wars. They sought only to consume, to corrupt, and to destroy. Our battle in the shrine had not been for a lumber camp or for a piece of territory. It had been a battle for the world itself, a small, brutal skirmish in a war that had been raging since the dawn of time. We were grunts, simple soldiers, but we had stood on the front line against the darkness, and we had held. I also learned about myself. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. I had felt fear in the ravine when the arrows rained down. I had felt it in the chaotic melee in the shrine's courtyard. But when I saw Grolnak fall, when I saw the path he had opened for us, that fear had been burned away by a cold, clear purpose. In that moment, I was not thinking of survival or glory. I was thinking only of my duty to him, to my comrades, to the Horde. I had found my courage in my kinship. When we finally crossed back over the South Fury River and set foot on the red soil of the Barrens, it felt like coming home. The harsh, open land that had once seemed so hostile now felt safe and familiar. We were out of the suffocating shadows, back under the wide, open sky. We were battered, we were bloodied, and we were fewer in number, but we were returning with our honor intact. We had faced the darkness and survived. Our return to the outpost in DeRoder was met not with cheers, but with the solemn, respectful silence of our fellow soldiers. They saw the gaps in our ranks, the wounds we carried, and the exhaustion in our eyes. They knew we had seen a true fight. Card Skullsplitter gave his report to the outpost's chief officer, his voice flat and professional, betraying none of the emotion I knew he felt. We were dismissed, told to rest and recover. That night, I did not go to the barracks. I took Zorka and Mako, and we went to the small, windswept bluff that overlooked the valley. We built a small fire, and I took out the grog I had been saving. I poured a measure onto the fire, the alcohol hissing as it hit the flames. "For Grolnak," I said, my voice thick. Zorka and Mako poured some of their own. "For Grolnak," they echoed. We then raised our mugs. "And for the survivors," Zorka said, her voice quiet but firm. She looked at me, and I saw a new maturity in her eyes, the steel of a true veteran being forged. We drank in silence, honoring the dead and the living, bound together by the blood and fire we had shared. My wounds would heal. The soreness in my muscles would fade. But the memory of a Shenvale, of the shrine, of Grolnak's sacrifice would remain. It was now a part of me, another stone in the foundation of my honor. I was no longer the green grunt who had marched out of this camp weeks ago. I had been tested, and I had endured. I understood now what it meant to be a soldier of the Horde. It was not about glory. It was about standing with your kin against the tide, holding the line, and paying the price, whatever it might be. The war was not over. It would never be over. There would always be another threat, Another call to arms, another march into the unknown. The drums would beat again tomorrow, and I will be ready. Luktarugar.